Hello there! It's great to see that you're still with me here building this project. And so in this lecture and the next one, we will build a section which contains the available homes on the website. And I'm actually really excited for this one because now you're going to learn how to build a rather complex component using a mix of CSS Grid properties, overlapping, and flexbox. And so basically what we're going to do here in this section is to lay out these cards here, okay? So each of these homes gets its own card. And I actually love to design these cards. So we had a card in the Naders project, if you remember that one. And now we have these cards here. So one card for each home. And so of course, all of this here, all of these elements that you see here, they are laid out using CSS Grid. Then also the 6 cards that we have here, they are also laid out in a grid, okay? So let's actually start with that overall grid, which is a 3x2 grid, such as we had before in the features section. And then after that, we will start building. So let's go to our markup here, of course, and create 6 home elements. So home, and I'm once more going to use emit here, which I showed you in the features section. And so I use the curly brackets to add some content into each of these elements. So let's just say home card, and then the number of the element times 6, because we want 6, hit tab, and that's it. And so now we can open up our file here, so the homes file, and start building our grid. So of course, our grid container here is this homes element, which is the parent of our 6 home grid items. So let's define our grid columns here. And let's do that the exact same way that we did in the features section, okay? So we're going to use repeat, and we say that we want as many columns as fit into the grid container. And for that, remember, you can use the autofit keyword. Okay, and then we say that we want each of these columns to have at least 25 rem and that they can go all the way to 1 fractional unit. So we do that with minmax, as we did many times before, and we say the minimum to 25 rem, meaning 250 pixels, and going all the way to 1 fractional unit if there is enough space available for that. So again, this is what we did with the features section, and this will ensure that basically these columns are completely responsive without having to write a media query at all. Now let's also define the gap between the rows and the columns at the same time of 70 pixels. Okay, and then just for the home, let's define a quick background color here, just so that we can see if our grid is working correctly. So background color, and I'm going to use color gray light 1. Okay, so this one here. And that's actually the real background color that these cards will have. So let's check that out now. And for some reason, that's not quite working yet. And yeah, so that's because I keep forgetting to set the display property to grid. So display grid. And also let's add some margin here, such as in the features section. So 15 rem top and bottom, and 0 on these sides. Okay, and so now that should look better. And yeah, now what's this weird background color? Now I think that's, yeah, we left that here. So of course we need to get rid of that. And all right, so here we have our 6 home cards basically. Now all we have to do is to fill them and then of course style them, which is going to be the toughest part. So let's start with the content in the HTML. Okay, so we don't want any of this. Let's give us some space here. And so what do we actually have in each of these home cards? Well, let's actually go back and check it out. That's the easiest way. So we have the image here, which shows the home. Then we have this heart button here, which is basically so that the user can click this and then put it on the wish list. So saying that he likes this property. Then we have, of course, the name of the property, the location, how many rooms it has, the area, the price, and then down here we have this button where we can then click and contact a realtor. Okay, So again, image, then this heart icon here, then we have the name of the house, then these 4 details, and then finally a button. So let's put all of that here into our component. So the image, and I'm going to call it the home image, very simple. Okay, so source, it's in the image folder, and home, or actually it's house, I believe. So house1.jpg, and let's just call it house number 1. Next up, we have the heart icon, and let's actually copy the syntax here for the SVG, because it's rather difficult to write it all out. And so this one is called home like, and the name of the icon is heart full. And so that is the like icon. Next up, we have the name of the home. And for that, I'm going to use an H5 element, but this time not a reusable one, because we want this one only to be in here. And so this is called the home name. And it's a beautiful family house. Next up, we have these 4 details about the property. So the location, rooms, area, and price. And so each of these will be one element. So a div called home location. And then in here, we will have an icon and a paragraph for the text. Okay, so this one is called the map pin. And then for the text, let's just say it's in the USA. And I'm actually not going to give these ones here a class name, because I would have to call this like home location icon and then home location text or something. And I don't think that's necessary. So let's just keep it here at home location. And then we know that we can style the SVG in there and the P element in there separately. Okay, so let's check that out at this point. And so of course the image here is huge. And all of this looks rather strange. But yeah, that's because we didn't format anything at all. So this will actually be quite similar for the other ones. So I'm just going to copy this a couple of times. And so the first one was location. Then the second one is the rooms. Then this one will be area. And the last one is the price. So for the rooms, we have this icon called profile mail, saying 5 rooms. Then we have icon expand here for the area. And 325 square meters. So let's now use the sub element here. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this one, but basically what it does is that it moves the text a bit up. And so in this case, because we have square meters, so that the 2 should be a bit on top of the 2, of the M actually. So just like this, so square meters. Maybe in the US, you're going to use square feet or something like that. I'm not really sure. But here in Europe, we use, of course, square meters. Then for the price, we have the key icon. And let's say that this one costs $1.2 million. So quite an expensive home. But again, we're talking about luxury homes here. And so that's reasonable. Okay, looks good to me. Now all that's left is the button. So button, and now we're going to reuse the one that we created before, which is called simply CTA. And contact realtor. Okay, and that's it. And let's now just confirm if everything is okay. And it is. Okay, and so we're now ready to do the same thing here for all the other 5 homes. And if you find it a bit boring to watch me creating this HTML structure here, then you can just use the final code and skip this part until the end of the video, okay? And so then you don't have to waste time doing all of this. But anyway, I will do it here now in the video. And so if you want to join me doing that, then of course you're more than welcome. So let's get rid of this. And 3, 4, 5, and 6. So that is a lot of code here. And Where does it even start? Okay, so this is the first one. This is the second one. So this is simply house number 2. It is called the Modern Glass Villa. So Modern Glass Villa. And if you're wondering how I selected all of this text here at the same time, I simply used this shortcut here for expand selection. Okay, so on your computer maybe this is a different shortcut, but I used this one here. Okay, so basically with that we can select all of the text that is inside of 2 tags like this one here. Okay, so we have Canada here, 6 rooms, 450 square meters, and 2,750,000. Okay, so next one. It's a cozy country house. It's in the UK. It has 4 rooms, 250 square meters, and it costs only 850,000. I think I forgot the image here. Yeah, that's right. So 2. This one is number 3. Or actually this one should be number 4 already. So number 2. Yeah, that's number 3 here. And so this one is the large rustical villa. Located in Portugal with 6 rooms, 480 and 1.950 millions. Number 5. It's a majestic palace house in Germany with a mind-blowing 18 rooms and 4,230 square meters. So of course I came up with all of this here arbitrarily, so none of this is real at all. So if you're a realtor by chance and none of this makes any sense to you, then I'm sorry for that. I just wanted to come up with some project here, and so I made up all of these numbers. So a modern family apartment. This one is in Italy with only 3 rooms, 180 and 600,000. Okay, and so that's it. So that's our content in the HTML. It looks all kind of weird now, and that's because these images are way too big, such as the icons. So let's just very quickly fix that, so in order that it doesn't look that bad. So let's close this one here and this one. And so let's here now add the selectors for the image. And let's say with 100%. And so that should make it better. Then we can also add all the other selectors here. So the one for like, for the name, and then the ones for the location, rooms, area, and price, they will actually be like all the same. Okay, and so let's add them all into one bigger selector. So location, the rooms, the area, and the price. And then remember that in there we have the SVG and the P, right? So in each of them we have the icon and then the P element. Okay, so let's add that as well. So of course as a nested element here, because it's inside of these selectors. And the same for the P. And so let's also now style these SVGs, because these icons, they are way too big now, okay? So first we can also fill them, so change their color basically. And again, I'm going to use color primary. And then a height and a width of 2 rem. And again, the height and the width here being the exact same value. Okay, and so just like this looks a bit more friendly now. So that is the first part of building this section and these home cards. In the next video, we're then going to take care of actually building the card and laying out all of these elements. So after a quick break, let's now continue building the home section that we were working on. So I already mentioned that we were going to lay out all of these elements in the card using a grid. But how are we actually going to do that? And the first thing that comes into my attention here is that this actually is laid out like in 2 columns, right? So you see that here we have these 2 on the left side and these 2 parts here on the right side. And so what that means is that we have a grid which has 2 columns here. And so we can then put basically these 2 here on one side in one column and these 2 in another column. And all the other elements, just like this button here, this name and this image, they can then span both these columns from one side to the other side of the grid container. And so let's now quickly do that and create our 2 columns. And as for the rows, we can actually let CSS take care of that automatically. Okay, so we're just going to define the columns and then the rows will be put automatically in there. And so once more, we're using an implicit grid here actually. And so you're probably starting to see that this is kind of a pattern. So most of the time, we just define the columns and then let CSS figure out the rows automatically. Now that's not always the pattern, so that's not always how it's going to work, but many times that is the best practice. Okay, so very simple in this case. Grid template columns, and all we want is 2 columns with the same size. So repeat 2, 1 FR. All right. Then before that's going to work, of course, we need to add display grid. And so now we're ready to see how that's going to look like. And all right, it's actually already doing what it's supposed to do. So let's now say that we want this image, this name here, and a button to span across both the column tracks. Okay, and that shouldn't be all too hard. All we have to say is grid column from 1 to -1. Right? And I'm actually going to copy this one here because it also applies to the name and to the button. Now, how are we going to do this with the button? Well, we should actually add a class here, I guess. So beside that class that it has here already, let's call it the home button as well. So home button. And so let's add that down here as well. And grid call from 1 to -1. Okay, and actually I noticed that I called this CTA for some reason, and CTA means call to action, but I think that up here I called it something else. And yeah, I called it button actually. Okay, so let's go to all of these. So I select CTA now, and then I hit Command D here in VS Code to select all of them. And then I just have to paste, and it's going to paste it in all of these 6 places. Okay, and if I check it out now, yeah, then that looks much better. So the image is already spanning here across the entire container, but for some reason the button is not. So let's check out why. And yeah, I guess I know why, because I only added this here to the last one. So of course I need to add this class to all of them. Okay. And just one more left. And yeah. Okay, so that's much better. So let's take a look at our grid here actually in the dev tools. So this one here. All right. And where is it actually down here? Well, let's inspect it. And yeah, so you see that it's spanning these two grid columns. Then we have this like icon here, which we still have to format. Then we have the name, and such as we specified, it's spanning these two columns as well. And then all of these 4 details here, they are of course just one cell, each of them. Okay, so let's now style this heart and position it up here in the corner. And so how do you think we should do that? And I think that the best way here is to use overlapping. So basically placing this grid item here on top of this image. So in this grid cell here. So right in this grid cell. Okay, so that's where I'm going to place this heart icon. So from column 2 to 3 and from row 2 to 1. Homes and yeah, here we go. So grid row, and now I have to specify all of this because otherwise the auto placement algorithm is just going to put it in column 2, 3, but not in the first row where I want it to be. So from grid line 2 to grid line number 3, just as we said before. Now let's also do the same as down here, but make it just a bit bigger. All right, if we take a look at that now, then here we go. So this is exactly where we wanted it to be. The problem is that now the image actually moved down. And that's because the automatic placement algorithm doesn't automatically put grid items one on top of another. So instead it just moves this one here down. But we don't want that to happen. We want this also to be in the first row. And so we have to specify that just as we had to do for the icon. So where is that? Ah, yeah. So grid row from 1 to 2, please. And that should fix it. Now, just to be sure that this icon here will always stay on top of this image, let's just give each of them a z-index. And so this one, of course, will be higher. So a z-index of, let's say, 1, and the like, a z-index of 2. Okay, and it worked even without that, but just to be 100% sure, and also to show you that this is how we define which of the elements should be placed on top of the other. Now, just one more thing here with the like is this here, so it's not aligned here to the right side as we want it to be. And how do we align grid items inside of grid cells horizontally? We just use the justify items property, right? But in this case, we want this to happen only with this one here. And so we can use justify self on this exact item. So justify self is going to align the item inside the grid cell, and we want it to be all the way to the end. So here we go. Now it's here all the way to the end. Now, just one more thing. Let's just give it some margin here. So to push it down and right a little bit. So margin, 1 rem, and with that, we should be good to go. All right, so that looks much better. Next up, we have this name of the house. And so that is how this looks like. So how are we going to do that? Well, first up, let's style this element and take care of placing it afterwards. So we're talking about this one here, the name. And so let's start with the font family. And this one is the display font. And so I'm using that variable name here. The font size is 1.6 rem. I want the text to be aligned at the center. It should have some padding of 1.25 rem. And the background color of color secondary. So that's or a dark blue. Then the color itself is white. And the font weight 400. So I'm doing all of this very quick and very fast without explaining much because you're already familiar with all of this and that's not really part of the CSS grid anyway. Okay, so that's the main style, and so let's now think about the more difficult stuff. Well, for some reason nothing really happened. Let's see why that is. And it's probably because of this error here. So let's give it a save again. And then yeah, here we go. So how do we now go from looking like this to what we have here? So basically, the width of this item here is not 100%, but just 80%. Then all of this here is centered in the grid cell, and then it's also moved up a bit. Okay, so let's take care of the first things that I said. So first off, the width is only 80%. And then it is horizontally aligned inside of its grid cell. And that's pretty easy. So once again, we're going to use justify self. And this time, set to center. So that's really easy, right? So that's how it looks like right now. And now all we have to do is to place it here, kind of here in the middle. Okay, and we have two options for that. The first one is to move it up from here, but then that would create like this half empty row here, right? So basically we would have one row which would be half empty, and then half of it would be occupied by this element. And I don't think that's really perfect. And so instead, what I'm going to do is to place this grid item here right in this first row. So basically putting it here into this first row. So here on top of the image. So using overlapping once again. All right, so I already defined the grid column. Let's also define the grid row. 1, 2, and let's define a z index as well in order to ensure that it's going to be on top of the image. So how does that look like? And whoa, it's stretching all the way from the top to the bottom of this grid cell. But that's of course not what we want. And so we have to vertically align it here to the bottom. And so we already used justify self. And for this one, we're going to use align self. And to the bottom, right? So justify self and align self are pretty similar, with the difference that justify does it horizontally, and so in the row axis, and align does it vertically, and therefore in the column axis. Okay? And so that should fix that. And for some reason it didn't. And that's because it's not called bottom, but it's called end instead. Okay? So let's take a look at that in the DevTools. And all right, so here it is, all the way to the end of this grid area. And now it's just very simple. We just have to move it down with a simple translate. So transform translate in the y direction 50%, because 50% corresponds to 50% of the height of the element itself. And so it's going to place it exactly at the center. And here we go. So that is the result that we were looking for. So I hope that you understood the reasoning about it, so why I did it the way that I did. And I thought this was a cool way of showing you why some of these properties like justify self or align self are really important to know all the time and have always in mind whatever situation we face when we build our layouts. Now, of course, we need some more space here. So this is now actually overlapping this icons here and this row, of course. And so let's just create some space between the rows. Okay, and that is actually pretty easy. We just need the grid row gap. So where is that? Gap. And I'm going to go with 35 pixels here. So again, this was here obtained through experimentation, and I settled here on this value. So I thought this was the best. Now this still looks rather strange. So you see that the space here between this home name and then this row here is not quite as we want it to be, right? And that's because we moved this here down, and so we created this inequality here, right? So let's see that a bit better here. Yeah, so you see that we have actually these 3.5 rams here, here, and here, but then we have like this overlapping. And it would be amazing if CSS Grid allowed us to style some of these gaps individually. So what I would like to do now is to say that this first gap here should be like 5 or 6 rem, and the others should only be 3.5 rem. But unfortunately, that's just not possible with CSS Grid at this point. And I don't know if that's going to change in the future, but right now, when we specify the gap in the grid, it will be the same for all the rows and for all the columns. So we cannot style just one gap individually. And so we just have to come up with a solution for that. And the solution that I found is to add a small margin to the top of these two items. So the house location and the house rooms. So if we add a margin to the top of these two, then that will increase basically the space between this name and then this next row. So that is, again, not ideal. It's not perfect, but we have to come up with solutions like this from time to time. And in fact, it works perfectly fine in the situation doing it like this. Okay, so let's copy this from here. And add a margin top of 2.5 rem. And if we check that out now, then that actually looks a lot better. And you can see it even better here over here. And yeah, so that's the best solution that I could come up with at this point. Another solution would have been to say that the second row here should be a bit higher than the others, and then move these two here down to the bottom of this row. But I think this way it's actually better. It's a bit cleaner. Okay, so not interfering with the individual height of these grid rows. Okay, and so we're now actually almost done with this grid. All we have to do is to apply some simple styles here to each of these four characteristics of the homes. So let's do that, and let's set the font size at first. And actually we can do it right here. So font size 1.5 rem. And then the text is going to inherit it. And so I don't even need this selector here. Next up, I want to give each of these four details a margin to the left side of 20 pixels. So 2 rem. And so that's how it's going to look like then. And so all that's left to do now is to actually put these two elements here side by side. And what's the best tool for that job? Well, I strongly believe that Flexbox is the way to go here. So Flexbox is really perfect for this really small stuff. And even if we start using CSS Grid for almost everything one day, I think that for this small alignment stuff, Flexbox is always going to be the easiest and most straightforward solution, because it's really as simple as that. All we have to do is to really say display flex, and then they will be two side by side. Okay, and even better, what we can do is to say align items and center. And so we will also vertically center these two items along the cross axis, right? So basically vertically. And so that looks even better now. And all of that with just two very simple lines of code. Now here on the icon, let's give it some margin to the right side. So in order to separate the icon from the text, so margin right, 1 rem. And that's necessary because in Flexbox, there's not something like the grid gap that we have in CSS Grid. So in Flexbox, we cannot specify gaps like we can with grids. But actually, I read somewhere, I think on Twitter, that they are thinking about adding gaps to Flexbox as well. And so someday, if that becomes available, then that will be fantastic. So we'll no longer have to deal with margin rights. Then we could simply add like a gap here in the Flex container in order to separate the icon from the text here. Okay, but right now that's not available. But maybe someday in the future, we will be able to do that. And so then it's even simpler. Okay, and I think that's actually it. I think that's the design we were going for. And yeah, I think it looks exactly the same, in fact. So that's awesome. That's great progress from you up until this point. We're building more and more complex layouts here, using more and more advanced techniques. And so we're already mixing CSS Grid with Flexbox and using some advanced placement techniques as well. So I hope that this is really useful for you so that you can build your own designs sometime in the future using all of these powerful techniques.